For as long as I could remember, college had been the goal. While other kids in my neighborhood dreamed of weddings or fast cars, I dreamed of ivy-covered buildings and lecture halls. I wasn't a genius, but I was determined. Every late-night study session, every extra credit assignment, every summer job to add to my savings, it was all for the future I'd worked tirelessly to build. "You don't have to worry about tuition," my mom would say whenever I stressed about college applications. "We've been saving for years, Emma. Just focus on your grades." And so I did. Every AP class, every club leadership role, every volunteering gig, each one a stepping stone toward the acceptance letter I was sure would come. My older brother, Ryan, had gone to college with no financial worries, and my parents always reassured me that I'd have the same opportunity. They were practical people, and if they promised something, they meant it. Or so I thought. At 17, I stood on the cusp of my dream, with applications ready to be submitted and my future waiting just beyond the horizon. I envisioned moving into my dorm, making new friends, proving myself in classes filled with bright, ambitious students like me. College was supposed to be my fresh start, my escape from the shadow of being Ryan's little sister. I worked part-time at a coffee shop, not because I thought I needed to, but because I wanted to build a cushion for expenses my parents might not cover. My small savings account sat untouched, meant for textbooks or an emergency fund. But the real safety net, the one my parents had promised, was supposed to be there when I needed it. It never occurred to me to doubt them. That was my mistake. Because while I was busy mapping out my future, my parents had already decided it for me. I still remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a cold Saturday morning, and I was sitting at the kitchen table double-checking the requirements for my dream school. My mom was sipping her coffee, flipping through a magazine, while my dad scrolled on his phone. "I'll need to send in the first tuition deposit soon," I said casually, more to myself than to them. "When do I get access to the college fund?" The silence that followed stretched a little too long. Dad glanced at Mom. She sighed and set her coffee down. "Emma, honey, we need to talk." That's when I knew. "The fund is gone," she said matter-of-factly. "We used it for Ryan's degree." I blinked, waiting for the punchline. "You what?" "We thought you'd understand," Dad added, like it was no big deal. "Ryan needed it more than you. You know how hard engineering school is. He has real career prospects." The words sank in, cold and heavy. "So, there's nothing left?" Mom sighed again, like I was being unreasonable. "Sweetheart, you don't really need college. Not everyone is meant for that path. You're a smart girl in other ways. You could do something practical. Maybe community college? Or a trade school?" "Not everyone is meant for that path. Ryan was, but not me." "You always got decent grades," Dad said, "but you're not like him. You're not academically gifted." The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the money, it was about their belief in me, or rather their lack of it. I forced myself to stay calm. "So, you're saying I don't deserve college?" Mom waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be dramatic, it's just Ryan had potential. We couldn't let that go to waste." And I could? I felt something inside me snap. The years of honor rolls, the late-night studying, the sacrifices I'd made to be the best student I could be, none of it had ever mattered to them. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Not everyone is meant for that path," I repeated. Mom smiled like she'd just done me a favor. "Exactly, see? You get it." "Oh, I got it, all right. I got that I was on my own." I didn't cry, I didn't scream or beg or plead for them to reconsider. That would have been pointless. Instead, I went to my room, closed the door, and started planning. If my parents weren't going to help me, then I'd help myself. The first thing I did was research every scholarship I could find. Need-based, merit-based essay contests. I applied to them all. Some required letters of recommendation, and thankfully, my teachers believed in me more than my own family did. I also took on more shifts at the coffee shop, even offering to cover weekends. My manager hesitated. "You sure, Emma? That's a lot of hours." "I'm sure." I had to be. Community college wasn't an option, not for me. I had worked too hard for too long to settle. I wanted more. I deserved more. I took out student loans, fully aware of the weight I was saddling myself with. But what choice did I have? I cut every unnecessary expense, turning down invitations from friends and avoiding places where I'd have to spend money. My parents barely acknowledged my efforts. "You don't have to struggle, you know," Mom said one night as I rushed to get ready for another shift. "You could just stay home for a year or two. Find a steady job. College isn't for everyone." For me, she meant, but it had been for Ryan. Dad, as always, backed her up. "You're working yourself too hard for nothing, Emma. People like you." He shrugged. "It's better to be realistic." Realistic? That word burned more than anything. I was realistic. I was just realistic enough to know that I'd never have the same support Ryan did, and that the only way I'd make it was if I pushed harder than anyone expected me to. So I did, and when the acceptance letter from my dream school arrived, I held it tight, knowing that every sleepless night, every sacrificed moment of fun had been worth it. My parents barely reacted. "That's great, honey," Mom said distractedly, folding laundry. Dad only asked, "So how are you paying for it?" "By myself." And that was fine, because from that moment on, I knew I didn't need them. Ryan was supposed to be the family's shining star. At least that's what our parents had always believed. He had been given everything: support, encouragement, endless financial backing, the golden child, the one with potential. But potential doesn't mean much if you don't do anything with it. The first cracks in his perfect image appeared just a few months into his first year of college. I heard the whispers from family friends before my parents ever admitted it. "He's struggling with his classes," Aunt Karen let slip one day when I ran into her at the grocery store. "Your mom says he just needs time to adjust." Adjust. That was one way to put it. Another way? He was skipping classes, partying too much, and spending money like it was endless. I saw it firsthand when he came home for Thanksgiving, all swagger and fake confidence, trying to act like everything was fine. "How's college?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He waved a dismissive hand. It's good, you know, college." He avoided specifics, but I noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, the brand new phone, the designer sneakers. He hadn't bought those with his own money. He didn't work. It was Mom and Dad's money, my college fund. The semester ended with him barely scraping by, but instead of acknowledging the problem, our parents made excuses. "Engineering is hard," Mom reasoned. "Ryan just needs to find his rhythm." Dad nodded. "He's a smart kid. He'll figure it out." But he didn't. By the end of his second year, the truth was undeniable. He was failing. He started skipping classes altogether, blaming bad professors and unfair grading. He maxed out his credit card on things he didn't need, assuming our parents would bail him out. And of course, they did. Again and again. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs, studying late into the night, and paying for everything myself. And despite everything, they still acted like Ryan was the one worth believing in. Until, finally, even they couldn't ignore the truth. Because Ryan was about to hit rock bottom, and this time, there would be no one left to catch him. The day I moved out, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. No more passive-aggressive remarks about my intelligence. No more reminders that I wasn't Ryan. No more pretending to be okay with being treated like an afterthought. I packed everything I owned into the trunk of my car. It wasn't much: a few boxes of clothes, my laptop, and some kitchen essentials I'd picked up from thrift stores. But it was mine. All mine. Mom stood in the doorway as I loaded the last box. "You don't have to do this, Emma." I shut the trunk and turned to face her. "I do." Dad didn't even come outside. He hadn't said a word when I told them I was leaving. It was as if I had stopped existing the moment I refused to follow their version of my future. Ryan hadn't bothered to say goodbye. Fine, let them have each other. I drove away without looking back. college was brutal. I was balancing work and classes, stretching every dollar and calculating whether I could afford fresh groceries or if I'd be eating ramen for the week. There were nights when exhaustion made my vision blur, mornings when I went to class running on nothing but coffee and pure determination. But I was happy. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who believed in me. My professors encouraged me. My classmates pushed me to be better. I built friendships with people who saw me for who I was, not as a shadow, not as an afterthought, but as someone worthy. And I thrived. I joined study groups. I landed an internship that barely paid but got my foot in the door of my industry. Every achievement, every small win was mine alone. I never once called home for help, not when my rent was due, not when I was sick, not even when I was so exhausted that I collapsed into bed the second I walked through the door. I refused to give them the satisfaction of thinking I had failed without them, because I hadn't. I was winning. And while I was building a future, Ryan was busy destroying his. The golden child was falling, and this time no amount of excuses could save him. By the end of his third year, Ryan had flunked out completely. It wasn't just one bad semester or a single failed class. He had dug himself into a hole so deep that even our parents couldn't buy his way out. The calls started coming in from relatives, Aunt Karen, Uncle Mike, even Grandma. "Have you heard about Ryan?" Of course I had. The news spread fast. Ryan had been put on academic probation, then suspended, then kicked out entirely. Too many failed classes, too many missed exams, too many second chances wasted. When I asked Mom about it, her voice was tight. He just had a rough time adjusting. Adjusting. It had been 3 years. Dad, ever the defender, added, "He just needs a break. He's under a lot of stress." I almost laughed. Stress? They had handed him everything, paid for his tuition, his rent, his car, his expenses, and he had thrown it all away. Still, they coddled him. When his school cut him off, they kept funding his lifestyle. When he maxed out credit cards, they paid them off. When he couldn't hold a job, they excused it. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs, pulling all-nighters and grinding for every opportunity I could get. Ryan was handed a future and set it on fire. I was denied a future and built one from the ashes. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the real moment of reckoning came when Ryan moved back home. No degree, no job, no direction, just a pile of excuses, and a family still too blind to admit that they had bet on the wrong child. Mom and Dad still wouldn't say it out loud, but I knew. They had sacrificed me for Ryan, and now they had nothing to show for it. Success didn't come overnight. It came in the form of endless nights at the library, balancing a coffee cup in one hand and a stack of textbooks in the other. It came in the form of back-to-back shifts, working myself to exhaustion just to afford rent. It came in the form of sheer, relentless determination, and it paid off. By my final year, I had landed a prestigious internship with a firm that barely accepted 1% of applicants. I juggled my coursework and internship, running on little sleep but knowing that every minute of effort was pushing me closer to the future I had fought for. I graduated with honors, walking across that stage with my head held high. My parents weren't there. I hadn't invited them. I didn't need their applause. I had gotten here on my own. While I was accepting my diploma, Ryan was still at home, jobless and aimless, bouncing between half-hearted attempts at employment before quitting after a few weeks. Mom and Dad still covered his bills, still called his failures temporary setbacks, still waited for the miracle that was never coming. I, on the other hand, had already accepted a high-paying job at a top firm before I even graduated. My hard work, my sacrifices, my endless grind, it had all been worth it. When I moved into my first real apartment, one I paid for with my own money, I sat on the floor with a glass of wine, staring at the empty space, letting the silence sink in. This was mine, all of it. No one had handed it to me, no one had paved my way. I had built everything they said I couldn't, and I wasn't done yet. The first time my mom called, I almost ignored it. It had been years since we last spoke, years of silence, of me living my life while they stayed trapped in theirs. But curiosity won. I answered. "Emma, sweetheart." Her voice was sugar-coated, too enthusiastic. "How have you been? We miss you." We. It was laughable. They hadn't missed me when I was struggling, when I was working multiple jobs just to survive. They hadn't missed me when I was celebrating my wins alone. I leaned back in my office chair, glancing at the city skyline from my apartment window. "I'm fine, busy." "Oh, of course. You're doing so well for yourself. We're so proud of you." Proud. They weren't proud when I got into college. They weren't proud when I landed my internships. They weren't proud when I graduated. But now that Ryan was unemployed, that their savings were drained from years of funding his failures, now that they were struggling financially, now they were proud. "How's Ryan?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom sighed dramatically. "He's just going through a rough patch." A rough patch. Funny, because I had gone through a rough patch too, but no one had bailed me out. Dad got on the line next, his voice gruff but awkward. "Emma, listen, we've been thinking. Family is important, right? And, well, Ryan's still finding his footing. We were wondering if maybe you could help out a little." There it was. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because they needed something. I almost laughed. I had spent years proving I didn't need them. And now, here they were, needing me. It was almost poetic. I smiled even though they couldn't see it. "No." Silence. "What?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "No," I repeated. "I worked for everything I have. I struggled alone. I succeeded alone. And now you want to act like we're a family again because you need money?" "Emma," Dad started, but I cut him off. "I was never the golden child," I said calmly. "I was never good enough for you. And that's fine, because I never needed you, and I sure as hell don't owe you anything now." Mom let out a choked sob. "You don't mean that. We're still your parents." I thought about all the times they told me I wasn't meant for success, all the times they told me to be realistic. I thought about Ryan sitting in their house waiting for another handout. I thought about myself, sitting in my own apartment, living the life I had built with my own hands. I meant every word. "Goodbye, Mom." And I hung up. The invitation arrived in an elegant white envelope, the kind that carried weight beyond just paper. Keynote speaker, Emma Carter. It felt surreal. Years ago, I had been a broke college student scraping by, working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water. Now, I was being invited to speak at a major industry conference, a room full of professionals, entrepreneurs, and rising stars looking for inspiration. I almost declined. I had nothing to prove to anyone. My success spoke for itself. But then my mother called. "We heard about your speech," she gushed, her voice filled with artificial warmth. "Your aunt sent us the article. We'd love to come." Of course they would. Now that I was someone worth bragging about, they suddenly wanted to be a part of it. I could already picture it, my parents sitting in the audience nodding along as if they had supported me all along, as if they had built me up instead of tearing me down. That's when I decided, let them come. Let them sit in that crowd. Let them watch as the truth unraveled in front of them. "Sure, Mom," I said sweetly. "I'd love for you to be there." The venue was packed, the stage lit up with a soft golden glow. Industry executives, rising professionals, young students, all eyes would be on me. I spotted them before I even stepped on stage. My parents seated near the front, wearing proud smiles like they had earned the right to be there. I almost laughed. They had no idea what was coming. I took a deep breath, stepped up to the podium, and began. I want to start by thanking everyone here today. If you had told college freshman me that I'd be standing here today, I would have laughed, because back then, this moment felt impossible. A few soft chuckles from the crowd. I smiled, then let it fade as I continued. I was told that I wasn't meant for college, that I didn't have the potential, that my education wasn't worth investing in. I let that hang in the air for a second, scanning the audience. My mother's smile faltered. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I kept going. I was promised a college fund my entire life. I worked hard, earned good grades, followed every rule. And when the time came to use that fund, it was gone, given away to someone else, because apparently I wasn't good enough for it. A murmur spread through the room. Some people exchanged glances, others sat up straighter, suddenly paying even closer attention. My parents stiffened. I saw my mother grip my father's arm, her face paling. Good. This isn't a story about resentment, I said, my voice steady. This is a story about resilience. I didn't let that betrayal define me. Instead, I worked. I sacrificed. I built my own future with my own hands. I proved them wrong. Silence. Then, applause. It started small, but grew, swelling through the room like a wave. I glanced at my parents. Their faces were frozen, horrified, humiliated, exposed. They weren't the proud parents of a keynote speaker anymore. They were the villains of the story, and they knew it. The applause echoed through the auditorium, a sound that should have been triumphant, but for my parents, it was a death knell. Their proud smiles had vanished. My mother sat frozen, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to speak, but had no words. My father's face was tight, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. And then there was Ryan. I hadn't even noticed him in the crowd at first, but now he was impossible to miss. His face was flushed and angry red, his jaw clenched as he stared at me like I had personally destroyed his life, which in a way I had, because now everyone knew. I stepped back from the podium, the applause still ringing in my ears, and returned to my seat on stage. The moderator took over, thanking me for my speech and transitioning into the next part of the event. But all around the room, people were whispering, murmurs of disbelief, of sympathy, of disgust. My parents knew it too. Mom leaned in, whispering frantically to Dad. I didn't have to hear her to know exactly what she was saying. She just ruined us. People were looking at them now, not as the proud parents of a successful daughter, but as the selfish, manipulative people who had robbed her of her future and given it to the son who wasted it. A few people even glanced at Ryan, their expressions shifting from curiosity to pity. And Ryan hated pity. I saw it in the way his hands curled into fists, his leg bouncing with barely contained anger. When the event ended, I barely had time to stand before my parents were in front of me. "What the hell was that?" My mother's voice was a furious whisper, her face pale. "You humiliated us." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Did I say anything untrue? Dad's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mom sputtered, eyes darting around as she realized people were still watching. Ryan stepped in, his voice low but seething. "You made me look like a failure." I met his glare without flinching. "You are a failure, Ryan. You had everything handed to you and you threw it away." His nostrils flared, but he had no argument. Mom tried again, her voice softer this time. "Emma, honey, we're family." I smiled. Exactly. And then I walked away. The fallout was instantaneous. By the time I got back to my hotel room, my phone was already buzzing with messages, texts, emails, notifications. The story had spread. Colleagues, professors, and even old classmates were reaching out. Some offered words of support, others asked for confirmation. Was it true? Had my own parents really stolen my college fund and given it to Ryan? Oh, yes. Yes, they had. And now everyone knew. A few industry blogs picked up on it, sharing snippets from my speech with headlines that left no room for doubt. Industry leader Emma Carter shares shocking story of parental betrayal. Success in spite of family, how one woman overcame the ultimate setback. Emma Carter's viral speech sparks debate on family favoritism. Viral. It was going viral. Meanwhile, my parents were frantically trying to do damage control. They started with the extended family. I got a call from my aunt the next morning. "Emma, I just talked to your mother. She's saying you exaggerated everything." I laughed. Did she mention the college fund, or how they told me I wasn't smart enough? Silence, then a sigh. She said they had to make a choice. They did. I kept my voice even, and now they have to live with it. A week later, my cousin texted me, "Your parents are trying to get people to see their side, but no one's buying it. Everyone knows Ryan's a screw-up." Then came the desperate calls, first from Mom. "Honey, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I blocked her number. Then Dad. "Emma, this has gone too far. You need to fix this." I blocked him too. Even Ryan tried. "You think you're so much better than me now, huh?" I didn't block him. I just replied, "I always was." I reinforced my stance publicly too. When a journalist reached out for an interview, I kept it simple. I owe my success to my own hard work. Not my parents, not my family, me. And when people asked if I had forgiven them, I gave them the same answer. Number, because I had no obligation to forgive people who had never once apologized. And I had no reason to support people who had let me suffer while they handed everything to Ryan. I owed them nothing. And now, they finally knew it. The first time they showed up at my office, security turned them away. The second time, they waited outside the building, standing by the entrance like lost children. The third time, I let them in. I wasn't doing it for them, I was doing it for me, because I wanted to see, face to face, how far I had come and how far they had fallen. They sat across from me in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of my company's headquarters. Mom looked nervous, wringing her hands like she was preparing for an audition. Dad looked defeated, like a man who had just realized he had lost everything. "Emma," Mom started, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "We just want to talk." I folded my arms. "Then talk." She swallowed. We made mistakes. We know that now." I stared at her, waiting. Dad cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We should have handled things differently, but we thought we were doing what was best for the family, for Ryan," I finished for him. Silence. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Do you know what it was like? To sit there at 17 and be told I wasn't worth investing in? To hear my own parents tell me that I wasn't good enough? That my future didn't matter?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong." I tilted my head. "Number. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd ever succeed without you. You thought I'd come crawling back, begging for your help." Dad exhaled through his nose. "You don't understand. We didn't have a choice." I laughed, cold and sharp. "You did have a choice, and you made it." I stood, smoothing my blazer. "So let's get to the real reason you're here. You're struggling, aren't you? Ryan still isn't working, is he? He's still living off you, draining your accounts. And now what? You need my help?" Mom looked away. Dad clenched his jaw. I had my answer. "You chose Ryan," I said simply, "so go ask him for help." Dad's voice cracked. "Emma, please." I shook my head. "No." Mom let out a choked sob. "We're still your parents." "Not anymore." I picked up my phone, pressing the intercom button. "Security, please escort my guests out." Dad looked like he wanted to fight it, but he didn't. Mom wiped at her tears, her face crumbling. They had come here thinking they still had power over me. They left realizing they never would again. Cutting them off should have hurt, but it didn't. It felt liberating. For the first time in my life, I was completely free. No guilt, no obligation, no lingering what-ifs. I had built everything they said I couldn't. I traveled. I dined at the kinds of restaurants I used to only dream about. I bought my first house, not because I needed it, but because I could. I surrounded myself with people who truly valued me. The friends who had supported me from the beginning. The mentors who had believed in me when no one else did. The colleagues who respected me for my work ethic, not my last name. My life was full. Meanwhile, my parents' world was crumbling. Ryan was still unemployed, still leeching off them, still making excuses for why life hadn't worked out the way he wanted. He had wasted every opportunity, and now, reality was catching up. Mom and Dad, they had spent so much money on Ryan that they were drowning in debt. Their house, gone. Their savings, wiped out. Their golden child, a failure. I heard through the family gossip that they had to downsize to a tiny apartment, that Mom had to pick up a job for the first time in years, that Dad resented every second of it. And me? I was flourishing, not just financially, but in every possible way, because success wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. They thought I was nothing without them. But the truth? They were nothing without me. Years passed, not months, years. Enough time for me to build the life I deserved, to become someone I was proud of. Enough time for me to completely forget the weight of my parents' betrayal, of Ryan's undeserved pedestal. Because by now I had won. Not in the petty, vindictive way they probably assumed I would. I didn't waste energy hating them. I didn't look for ways to rub my success in their faces. I simply moved on. I was happily married to someone who supported me the way my family never had. Someone who never belittled my ambitions, who celebrated my wins instead of feeling threatened by them. Someone who saw me. My career was more successful than I ever imagined. Financially secure, leading my industry, making a name for myself on my own terms. I owned properties, investments, assets that ensured I would never have to depend on anyone ever again. And most importantly, I was at peace. I no longer carried the need to prove myself to the people who once doubted me, because their opinions didn't matter. They never did. Ryan never changed. He still drifted from job to job, still made excuses, still waited for someone else to save him, but there was no one left to do it. Mom and Dad had spent everything trying to keep him afloat, refusing to accept that he was sinking on his own. They had lost their home. They had nothing to show for all their sacrifices. And yet, even after all these years, they still refused to admit the truth, that they bet on the wrong child. I heard about them occasionally through distant relatives, their voices hesitant when they brought my parents up in conversation. They're getting by. They don't talk about Ryan much anymore. They regret a lot, Emma. I would only nod, never asking for more, because it wasn't my problem anymore. One day, while organizing my home office, I found something tucked away in an old folder, my rejection letter from my parents. Not a literal one, but it might as well have been. It was an old college fund document, the one my parents had prepared for me before they decided I wasn't worth it. I stared at it for a moment, then laughed. That was supposed to be my ending. The moment that destroyed me, instead, it had been my beginning. I shredded the paper without hesitation, watching as the remnants of my past disappeared into nothing. Then I picked up my coffee, stepped out onto the balcony of my home, and watched the sun rise over the life I had built for myself. Because the best revenge? It wasn't getting even. It was getting better. It was winning without them. And I had never felt more at peace. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more brutal.